Hi everyone, my name is Stephen Brook. Today I'm going to be taking you through a project I completed for CSCI 443, user interface design. This project was completed in fall of 2024. So the entire project sort of was focused around building an application to solve some kind of real world problem. So in my case, I decided to look towards a problem that I actually kind of have to deal with every single day, which is task tracking apps. I've used all kinds of different task tracking apps. I've used Apple Reminders, Outlook Calendar, TickTick, ClearList, Minimalist, and even Notion. And I've just found that none of those applications really worked for me and did what I was looking for in a task tracking app. So I thought that that would be a pretty good problem to focus on. So this entire project followed the UX design thinking process, which is broken up into five different stages. There's the empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and testing stages. Each of these stages had roughly 2 to 3 weeks for completion. So I'll just progress through those linearly as I did. So looking first at the empathize stage, this stage was really focused on collecting data from real world users. So going off of that, I initially had to create a problem statement that I was really hoping that this sort of survey would help me to solve. So that problem statement was, all task management apps create and present their own unique advantages and challenges, creating a complicated user interface. My goal with this survey is to determine what tools people use to schedule their tasks, what features they look for, such as Apple or Google Calendar integration, time reminder services, urgency markers, and category separation. Additionally, this survey will help me to determine any issues that common task scheduling programs cause or create. This information will help provide purpose and direction for the task scheduling program that I will design. So again, going off of that, this whole sort of stage is focused on collecting user data. I then researched the demographics for this task tracking app, and I found that really age and gender isn't necessarily important to this. It's more so what tasks people have to track. So because I sort of wanted to create this application with people focused around education in mind, I decided to go after really, really busy people who have some kind of emphasis on school. So I have people who are doing full-time school with two part-time jobs. I have people who are doing full-time work with part-time school, just all kinds of different demographics that sort of have that school background in mind. After choosing the demographic, I had to decide on sort of the style that I wanted my survey to follow. And I decided to make it really informal and conversational. And I did this because I didn't want any of these subjects to feel like they're sort of trapped and locked in and that they have to answer my questions. I really wanted them to be able to feel like they could sort of go in depth into any topic that was important to them, because after all, that is what is important in this stage is sort of finding out what is important to the user and not what's important to myself. After each interview, I generated empathy maps for every single subject. This encompasses what the user thinks and feels, sees, says and do, and hears. And this is really important because it helps me to consider that um, this is sort of the conclusion of this stage, was that what the features that are important to me are not necessarily important to everybody else. And that's really important to consider because this app isn't just made for me, it's made for an entire user base. So that really helped to sort of inform my project moving forward. So looking at the define stage, I was first tasked with generating a persona. This persona is really just the average of pretty much all of the subjects that I interviewed from stage one. And this is really important because, again, it just helps me to consider that this application is not being made for me. It is being made for real world users who have real world needs and expectations. And this persona just kind of brings all of that to life and really helps me like have a person in mind to say, okay, this is who the app is being made for. And that person is sort of a representation of all of that user data I collected. Additionally, I created a business model for this application. I'm not going to go too in depth into it here, but it encompasses key partners and activities and resources, as well as the value proposition for potential user bases, customer relationships and segments, the different channels that the application would use, cost structure, and revenue streams. What I will mention is that I think for a full release, it would be really important to have some kind of email integration. That's why I have iCloud Mail, Gmail, and Outlook listed under key partners. But for this project, that was just a little bit out of scope, but it is something I would expect for a full release. Again, the sort of key findings from this stage is that the app is not being built for me. It's being built for the users that I really surveyed in stage one. Moving to the ideate stage, I first sort of, had to start with what are the core pillars of this tracking app. So I found that those are the tasks themselves, the calendar, different views that you could have, and quality of life features. From there, I sort of branched out from each key pillar, just sort of trying to incorporate as many of those important user features as I could. Some of those took me down short little paths. As you can see, looking at the task pillar, there's urgency raking, then goes to notifications. Some of them are just one-off ideas like a due date. So then after I sort of ideated through each core pillar, I went back through and tried to connect as many of those different ideas together as possible. And I think that this stage was really helpful to show me not only what features are important, but how they should connect together in order to be the most usable. So you can see that something I considered is that urgency rankings would have notifications, and notifications would probably be displayed on the home screen and might even connect to some sort of task from a widget type situation. So again, it just really helped me to consider how the different functionalities of the app should be interconnected. Moving on to the prototype stage, I started with this low fidelity prototype. I created the sign in and sign up screens and different screens for each of the things that I think would be really important. So there's task views and category views and settings and all kinds of good things like that. And I really just tried to create this low fidelity prototype to encompass as many of those different sort of features that people had been requesting since stage one of this project that I sort of created during the ideation stage and am now implementing into this prototype. And this low fidelity prototype really helped to inform the next part, which is the high fidelity prototype. And as you can see that there's a couple of things that have changed. The main one being the navigation. In the low fidelity prototype, I had this sort of pinned navigation bar at the bottom, but I just found that that takes up way too much screen real estate, especially for something that's already running on a really small screen. So I decided instead to put that in a hamburger style menu, and I thought that this would be really intuitive for users, and also it would be really easy to interact with. If you click on the menu, it expands, and then you can very clearly see each of your options with text and icons, as opposed to just sort of an icon that might mean different things depending on what section of the app that you're actually in. Other than that, a lot of the key functionality of the app sort of remains. You can see that all the different screens and settings are still there, but something that I really focused on was making sure that the user experience was consistent. So the iconography is consistent throughout. There are things that users would be familiar with, and when they click on it, would sort of do intuitively what they would expect it to do. But again, just trying to incorporate as many of those key features into a usable and aesthetically pleasing interface as possible. The next stage was to sort of test how that prototype works. So I created an entire test dashboard. I'm not necessarily going to go into it here. It just takes a little too long, and I don't want to waste everybody's time. But I did consider everything from like sort of what is the product we're testing, what are the objectives, who are the participants, what are the different tasks, what are the responsibilities, when and where are we going to do this, what do we need to do this. Everything like that was considered in this dashboard. So what ended up sort of happening during this test is that I would just load up the high fidelity prototype on my laptop and hand it to the subjects, and I would also just give them a list of tasks to complete. And as they completed those tasks, I would collect sort of the time it took them. I would collect the number of inputs they made, if the system ever had any errors, if it ever failed, and then at the end, I would ask them to give a sort of subjective difficulty rating. So on this screen here, you can see that I've made graphs for the errors and failed pages. I think it's pretty important to note that the system never failed. Each of the users were completely able to finish all of the tasks required of them. But it's also important to note that each user encountered a single error. And it turns out this is actually due to a bug in the Figma software that I used to develop a high fidelity prototype. So some of the other data I collected here, as you can see, I've got on the top right clicks, so that's the number of inputs. And you can see that there's one sort of subject who has an unusually high number of clicks, and you'll see that that subject also gave it a higher difficulty rating than everybody else. And this is something that during my conclusions to this stage, I figured out that it was because I gave the users my personal laptop with my input device. And moving forward, I think it would really be best if they used the input device that they're comfortable with. I think that that would reduce the number of clicks and the difficulty ratings and probably reduce the time as well. I also made graphs that represent the means and standard deviations of all of these. And again, it's important to note that the highest standard deviation came from the difficulty and inputs. And that's, again, just likely due to that incorrect testing I did. I really should have had every subject complete the test on their own personal devices. So as I've mentioned sort of throughout, this entire project is available on an Adobe course webpage. There's a lot more detail there. I highly recommend you go and check that out. The high fidelity prototype that I developed is also available online alongside any Python code and data files that I used. Additionally, I do have a portfolio website, so feel free to check that out. Yeah, this project was really interesting, and I really had a great time exploring the UX design thinking process. It was really interesting to see how all of those different stages tie together. Thanks for watching.